Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Blue Mondays, a Eureka 7 recap podcast. I'm your host, I'm Zigg, and as always, I'm joined by the lovely Aqua guys. Hello, Aqua.
Emergency. This is not a test. Evil woman spotted in Eureka 7.
Yes, and because of such a high-stakes situation, we have brought in the blog's foremost expert on evil women. G is back to join us. Hi, G. How's it going?
Guess who's back? Back again.
Yep.
G-Man's back. Tell a friend.
Oh, we shall.
I can do music references too.
Indeed. Yes, very
Damn,
topical.
Slim Shady is here.
Yeah, very topical music references as well.
Hey, yeah, that song came out last year.
Yep. No, if you wanted to reference modern Eminem, you would have to suck about 300% harder. So,
look, man, you're only going to catch me referencing early 2000s M. When he was at his most talented and also most problematic.
Yes, I mean an artist for whom the term problematic was created.
You ever heard of Chris Christopherson? Well, he's Christopherson.
Speaking of highly problematic, we learned some problematic things about our heroes this week because we are covering episode 9, Paper Moon Shine, and episode 10, Higher Than the Sun. I think it's fair to say that this is a pretty important pair of episodes, no?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
episodes where Eureka 7 finally reveals itself to be just Full Metal Alchemist.
Look, they clearly took some inspiration from their recent
It's funny
success.
You say that because the reason why I am potentially back for this episode is because this is the part where Eureka 7 just becomes Gundam.
Yes.
I mean, they even mention a white devil.
Yes, I mean, I was going to mention that when we get to it, but yes, there's some pretty Gundam-heavy stuff in this couple of episodes. So, let's launch into it, shall we, with episode 9, Paper Moon Shine. Now, Aqua, these are some of the easiest music quizzes you're going to get throughout the show. So can you tell me what episode 9, Paper Moon Shine, is a reference to?
I have no idea.
Okay, so to be fair, I don't entirely blame you with this one, but it is a reference to a very famous 1930s song called It's Only a Paper Moon.
All right.
Yeah. Written by Harold Arlen and lyrics by Yip Harburg and Billy Rose. Arlen is a famous Great American Songbook composer.
Right, this is like a standard classic.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Among other things, he wrote the soundtrack to The Wizard of Oz and also noted Margaret Thatcher theme tune, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. But yes, he is a renowned composer, and this song is a classic. It has been covered many times by luminaries such as Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Perry Como, Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong. Anybody who is anybody in like jazz and swing music has covered the song. It is also the name of an exceptionally good episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is also centered around the song. And the song is also about how it doesn't matter if the rest of the world is false as long as you love me, which... the songs that are referenced are not always topical to the episodes, but I'm going to say this one might be. So let's begin, shall we?
See, when you Google Paper Moonshine, all you get is like some story about a guy who made booze out of toilet paper.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, Prohibition was rough. People were making booze out of a lot of things back then. Speaking of booze, there is a prominent bottle of mysterious yellow substance in the beginning of this episode.
Get that LCL as a gift from the weird religious lady we saved.
We do learn her lane here at Tiptory, but let's recap what happened at the end of the last episode. We are on the way to the City of the Sky, Del Cielos. I can never...
Ciudades del Cielos.
Thank you, person who is better at languages than I am there. But yes, because Holland and the crew promised to take Tiptory back to the City of the Sky, the Gate of Destiny. There are quite a few different different
names
euphemisms.
For it, right?
Yes,
They also mentioned the Great Wall.
Yes,
the city is how you get to the Great Wall.
Yes,
and it is also the Gate of Destiny.
Yeah, and we'll learn more about the Great Wall in the next episode.
Yeah,
there's one thing actually which we didn't mention last episode, which comes up again at the beginning here, which is the name Norb.
Right, which is what Tiptory just calls Holland at the beginning of this episode.
No, she doesn't call him Norb. She says that they should be looking for Norb, but she doesn't call him Norb.
Okay.
No, Norb is a separate person, I will tell you that. But
I thought his name was Norb Holland.
No, there is a Holland is his first name. Like, he is Holland.
Okay.
But yes,
Apologies.
They mentioned Norb again. He was also briefly mentioned at the end of last episode as somebody they should be looking for. One thing I want to start with on this episode mentioning, we get the first speaking appearance for Jobs, who is the tall, bald fellow.
Yeah, the guy who seems to be in the engine room, I'm assuming.
Yeah, he's kind of their engineer come fixer, as you would expect after Woz. He is named after Steve Jobs, the other Apple co-founder.
The other Steve from Apple.
Yes, but unfortunately, in a sad coincidence, in the dub, he was voiced by Dave Mallow, who passed away earlier this week as we're recording there.
Yeah.
Much noted veteran voice actor, veteran of many anime dubs, so R.I.P. Dave Mallow,
Also a prominent part of many Power Rangers.
The original Power Rangers narrator, in fact, there. So, yes, weird little bit of coincidence there, weird little bit of serendipity. But, yes, we, as Tiptory leaves, she gives them the mysterious jug of liquid.
The mysterious jug of Mountain Dew. Yeah.
Yes, which Holland says, pray we'll never have to use this. I honestly don't remember what this is. G, do you remember what this is?
No, I have zero recollection of the glowing piss bottle.
Yeah,
LCL. My guess it's like super fuel, maybe something they would need to juice up the nerve ash or the gecko to
a
escape
bottle
something.
of Nitro 9 or something.
Yeah.
No, what it clearly is liquefied skyfish larva. If a man consumes it, 99.9% he dies, but if he lives, he gains free
the water
cognition.
of life.
Yes, he becomes the Mahdi.
It's been real weird how
he'll be able to do the legendary 900.
It's real. Wait, it turns him into Tony Hawk.
Well, who would be the chosen one in a world of sky surfers?
Tony Hawk is the Lisan Al-Gaib. He is the Kwisatz Haderach.
Have you forgotten about a little game called Kelly Slater's Pro Surfer? Thank you. I didn't make that up. That's a real game.
That's a real game. Just like Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX.
Yeah, that one's a bit more believable. But yes, the point is that the mysterious piss liquid will probably come up later, but the fact that neither G or I can remember exactly what it is probably tells you that it's not super important.
Right. It wasn't that important.
Yeah, but a little detail I really like here: Renton is still calling Moondoggy Doggy Nissan.
Yes.
Brother,
my bro Boogie Boy. And every time he's like, "Stop calling me that."
Yes.
But secretly he kind of likes it.
It's adorably pathetic, I think.
Well, that kind of sets up the sort of drama of this episode, right? Where they arrive at Cielo, right? And it is this bombed out city, right? Clearly, well, later we do find out it is inhabited, but it is clearly no longer an extant
right. It's not an active civilization.
Yeah. But it clearly was once a great city at one point.
Yes, it's been bombed out, clearly destroyed in the war. And as they're dropping off Tiptory, right, and then they're doing their, whatever, they're waiting to fuel up before they leave. Moondoggy.
It's actually drinking water, which is a nice little detail.
Yeah. It's like when they had to get the salt, and that's how they met Kukuru's Doen on his island. But very, very good sort of bit where Moondoggy and Renton are just like, but bro, the waves here are really good, bro. And they get excited because hey, well, we gotta wait for this, refueling to finish anyways. So we should go catch these, sick gnar-gnar waves, bro.
With my cool new board.
Right.
There's actually quite a lot of Gecko State attempting to do the thing that they are famous for doing in these 2 episodes.
That
which
is true,
catching
yeah.
waves.
And then failing.
And failing, yes, but
But this is interesting, right? Because obviously, like, ref boarding is like one of the like most iconic aspects. It is the primary cultural aesthetic of the Gecko State identity, right? And so it almost seems natural, right? That, okay, Moondog and Renton, we're going to go do some boarding, right? Like, that's what we do. And this sets off Holland in a way we have not seen him act up till this point in the show, right?
I mean, the weird thing about the surfing is also like it's kind of a front. I mean, it's a front for a front for a front, right?
I mean,
like,
yes.
Ostensibly, they're a group of cool surfers. Oh no, wait, actually they're mercenaries. Oh no, wait, actually they're like a rebel cell.
I mean, let me tell you some things about real life surf culture and flower power culture. But I mean, like, we had hints last episode that, and you know, in the beginning of this episode, that this is not a place that Holland particularly wants to go. It's a place that has some bad associations for him. And even in the first couple of minutes of this episode, he is resolute that they are putting the lady down and getting the hell out of there. And obviously the thing which sets him off is the idea that Moondoggy and Renton are doing something other than the minimum possible effort to get the ship in the air again, right?
Right.
And I think this is a really interesting dynamic because obviously once you have the context of what Desiello is and what happened here, like, spoilers, but Renton basically wants to do a kickflip Superman at Hiroshima. At Hiroshima.
Yeah, kind of.
But like, without that context, right? Like, this, I think this is like one of those moments that really sort of like really shows. I mean, I think we've all picked up on this up till this point, but I think this is kind of the first like breaking point that really tears down the facade of how much of an adult Holland is. Right.
I mean,
that,
it absolutely shows him in, like, when the big reveal comes that Holland is like a scumbag. That is still something that is considered like in character, right? Because he's like a cool dude and a bro,
right?
But this is something complete. Like, this puts him in a completely different light.
He beats a child, right? Like, there's no way around it.
Look, there is a long and proud tradition of this in robot anime of all sorts.
Right, exactly. This kind of is his Bright Noah moment, right? Where he just lays his hands on Renton. And I think...
Well, actually, I think I'm going to push back on that because, firstly, ultimately, they both have the same result, which is they drive the person in question away. Because guess what? You're not going to do anything for someone who just hit you. But I think the difference was Bright Noah was genuinely trying to motivate Amuro Ray into... doing his duty for the crew. This is a much more petty, cruel thing from Holland. This is purely a personal grudge. He doesn't do it.
He's lashing out.
Yeah, he's not disciplining Renton like a father figure would, quote unquote. He's just being shitty.
And you see that in Renton's reaction too, because like normally when Renton gets put in his place, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that." But here he is just like disillusioned and disappointed, and he starts crying, and he's just
I think most heartbreaking
why
of
did
all
you do
is
that, man?
Renton just wants an explanation, right? Because like from Renton's perspective, he and Moondoggy have not done anything wrong, right? Like, they are just hanging out. Like, they literally cannot leave until the refueling finishes. Why not do a kickflip while we wait? And then
they're literally doing what Gecko State does, right?
Yes, and of course it would be confusing and traumatizing and aggravating, right? Like, especially when Holland adamantly refuses to elaborate on why he's beating up Renton.
Yeah, and I mean, both of these episodes kind of center on Holland and give him a lot more depth than before. But we've been talking for quite a while about how the pedestal has been slowly breaking for Renton in regards to the Gecko State crew and Holland in particular. And this is very clearly a turning point for the relationship between the two characters, right? Like, after this, there is no more hero worship, really.
No.
It's also because, like, I mean, the big twist in this episode is something you've kind of seen coming. Like, if you've seen enough anime, you know that Eureka has a dark past. And
I
it's
mean,
like
if you've seen enough stories,
right,
you know
and it's like a child soldier or something like that. But then the real twist comes, as it turns out, it's not just Eureka, but all of Gecko State were originally like government black ops.
That's not really sequential. I mean, she makes it clear from the beginning that she was under Holland's command.
Right. But the thing is, like, we've always assumed, I mean, at least I've always assumed, based on the hints that were given, is that Eureka was, you know, a kind of child soldier, weird freak experiment, artificial human kind of thing, who was rescued by Gecko State. But it seems to be the other way around, that she is actually the one who caused Gecko State to turn face, basically, and start rebelling against the government instead of, you know, doing their dirty work.
Yes, and I mean it's complicated, and we will see more of that past as we go along. You know, let's try and stick to the linear story for now. You know, I think I think it's very funny that even as they're depicting Renton running away from like this terrible traumatic event, he's still kind of bad at boarding. Like he hits the sign, he hits washing, he hits all the various different things. But I think, you know, this is also, you spoke a little bit earlier, G, about how this is basically him like getting sick air in the ruins of Hiroshima, but it's another testament to how sheltered he is, right? Like, you know, that he doesn't know about this place, about the military action that was conducted here. And he talks, you know, in the scene where he meets Tiptori again, he talks very vaguely about some propaganda he was fed in school about the Voter Act, but it's clear that he just has no first-hand experience of the world again, you know.
And this is actually, like, you guys keep calling on Hiroshima, obviously, as the problem. I mean, but this show is kind of contemporary with the Iraq War, which was, is sort of similar in terms of imagery, in sort of like creating this image of an enemy that we don't really know about. You know, you're taught that, oh, these are, you know, religious freaks who don't care about anything other than their backwards values.
I mean, I would avoid, like, perhaps being too specific on that point, because that is just how propaganda has worked throughout history.
I did not want to draw straight from the headlines, but I think you are correct, Aqua. I think it's just I felt it'd be maybe a little gauche to just say that, like, Cielo is like literally Gaza, but like there is some elements of like this story is clearly, this plot line is heavily inspired. I mean, again, the show was made in was it 2003?
2005.
Five. So this is directly in the wake of the Second Gulf War, right? This is a post 9/11 anime, and yes, I think it is very easy to give the Voter Act the sort of like vaguely Middle Eastern sort of cultural reading, right? Especially when we get the conversation here where Renton basically discovers the remnants of the Voter Act people who still live in Cielo, right? The refugees.
Yeah, I mean it's a trailer park. It's a refugee encampment. It's every sort of, like, they're living in the shadows of a once proud city, basically.
Like they cannot bring themselves to leave this place. Like despite the like grievous material harm done to them, like they cannot abandon this homeland, right? And I think we get this really great conversation between Tiptori and Renton about, like, as you were alluding to, Zigg, the vague propaganda that Renton has been raised with versus the real lived experience of Tiptori and the Voter Act, and this kind of talk about, like, I'm trying to remember, like, thematically where this is meant to go, right? But sort of this idea of, like, no matter, like, how many times it changes hands, no matter the actions of the human race, like Tiptori and the Voter Act believe that land, the earth, ontologically, fundamentally remains the same.
It's interesting, right? Because it's I mean, it corresponds with what we were talking about of, like, you can destroy this place as much as you want, but its inherent meaning to the people, to the Voter Act, can't really change. And this is sort of I think that from a Western perspective, that is a distinctive, other kind of view. It is something mostly associated with people who are not us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, serves two purposes, right? It serves both to humanize the Vodorak and make us see their perspective, their way of looking at the world, while it also once again shows the perspective, the contrast between the dominant society in the world of Eureka 7 and this minority that is the Vodorak,
Right.
who both seem to look at the world in very different ways. Because we also learn about the environmental consequences of what the state / the army is doing in this episode, right? They talk about pile bunkers. There must be some kind of extraction or exploitation of nature going on that the Empire is doing, that Renton also has been propagandized into believing is a good thing, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, the interesting thing about this conversation is that it's both kind of a very spiritual world building style conversation, but there's also quite a bit of important actual plot information encoded within. For example, the Renton talks about how all the pile bunkers, which are the big rods we see shoved into the ground everywhere, are meant to prevent earthquakes, tectonic events, stuff like that. You know, we get a reference to scubs, it's not entirely clear what that is yet, but it's something that we will learn as we go along.
It's been mentioned before, I think.
Yes, a couple.
Wasn't
of
it
times,
mentioned? Yeah, in episode 7, I think, when Huey Lewis has to report on.
You have to stop doing that.
Yes, Huey Novak, is reporting on that mysterious incident with the various goons and their mechs being taken out. Yeah.
I mean, the term keeps popping up, as does, the Corallian, which we've heard a couple of times, but we'll get into that, But yes, it's both. It's very good dialogue because it is both furnishing you with these details about the world, but also it shows, it develops the Vodorak religion and the Vodorak sort of way of life. And I think that you guys are right. In the West, we are sort of trained to believe that we have moved beyond the idea of needing to hold reverence for particular places, but for a huge part of the world, holy places are still a real thing, and people are fighting and dying for them every day.
And even more materially, a homeland is a homeland, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There's a great deal of meaning there for sure.
So we get that aspect, and then the third aspect of this is, as you guys said, we see that Renton is, again, not really equipped for the real world. He has, in the way that children do, he has a lot of things in his head, but none of them are from his life experience, right? He has ideas, but all of those ideas have been put there by other people. And so when he is put into a situation which he does not have the knowledge to respond to, he cannot fall back on experience or intuition because it's not something he has yet. But yes, I mean, moving on a little bit here, a couple of things here.
Sorry, can I say one more thing about I think it's interesting how the show also reveals the world as Renton learns about it, even though he is technically supposed to know about things like the Vodorak and the war and what the Empire is doing, but that stuff hasn't really come up in his life, and as a result, it also hasn't really been part of the show. Like, the thing is, I'm watching these episodes, and sometimes something is revealed about the world that makes me think of well, okay, why didn't they say that from the start? It's like this concept is only introduced now, like the existence of the Vodorak, for example. But then I realized that it actually makes sense because the show is from Renton's perspective.
Right.
And things only show up in the show, even though they have always been a part of this world, once they become relevant for Renton and his story. Because he does know about these things, but he also doesn't really know about these things, right? He learned about them in school. But you know how kids are. They learn about something in school and they'll be like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you
they'll
ask a
study it for the
14-year-old
test.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they'll just
Ask a
forget about it.
Right. Ask a 14-year-old kid how much they know about the Iraq War, right? And it's like, I mean, it's probably similar to what Renton knows about the Vodorak, if we're being honest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, as well, we know from everything we've seen so far that Renton is a dreamer. He has had his head in the clouds. The things he has been interested in are, the Gecko State and his mythologized image of them. He's always looking to the horizon and not looking at the things that are around him, and the problems that are right there where he is. A little bit Yoda-esque there, but so
he likes the aesthetic of rebellion without actually knowing what they're rebelling against.
I mean, of course he does. He's a teenager,
what it means,
right?
Yeah.
Yes, but I mean, so you're absolutely right. Things become important in the narrative of the show when they become important to Renton, and I think that's a very deliberate, creative choice here. As you mentioned earlier, firstly, when Eureka takes the Nirvash out, we get a brief hint as to what's about to go down, because it's mentioned that I can't remember who says it, but somebody says to Eureka, going out in the Nirvash is dangerous. You know that. So they know the people don't want them here. They know that they are not welcome here. This is a well-established fact. And yes, when Eureka lands, she is immediately stoned, and not in the good way, by the people there. They call
the Nirvash is... Oh, go ahead.
They call the Nirvash the White Devil, or the subtitles say White Demon, but it's the same term as the Gundam term Shiroi Akuma.
Yes.
And it's very clearly a deliberate reference. But yes, these people hate her. They want to kill her.
Frankly, as they should. I mean, from their perspective, like we get this very. I mean, again, like Eureka 7, like for as much as it is about like boyhood dreams, like this is I was thinking about this because like there has been talk, there is discourse about every Gundam, right? And about like how deadly or violent or fatal is your average Gundam, right? Like there's talks about like, oh, well, G-Witch wasn't really a Gundam because if you think about it, only like 3 people died in the entirety of the show. Or whatever. Like people have these conversations, right? And it did have me thinking, though, about, like, this is not even from a wow, cool robot or I like to see blood, like, perspective, but, like, how... I am always a little interested in how fatal a given mecha anime is, if that makes sense, right? Like, how dangerous is the act of piloting a mecha is.
I'll come right out and say it. I had forgotten quite how explicitly violent this episode is.
I mean, even up till this point is a pretty violent show, right? Like,
but that violence has largely been abstracted away because we've seen robots exploding and
it's like stormtroopers getting gunned down. Like it's meaningless violence,
right? But this is kind of where they really like kind of pull back the curtain, right? Because we get this fairly upsetting flashback, right? Where Eureka reveals the truth of like Gecko State, and
she really lets those civilians have it. Like,
dude,
that shot where she shoots with the beam rifle and the beam misses them, but then like they're flash fried
incinerates
afterwards.
Them. Yeah. It's like there's that, like. There's the part where they manage to incapacitate the Nirvash, and then she just gets out and starts shooting them on foot.
There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of explicit stuff shown on screen here.
And of course, we also get the reveal that this is how Eureka... This is also the moment that breaks Eureka's conditioning, is when she finds the children, right? The kids, right? Because they are literally shielded under a pile of bodies of the Vodorak she murdered. It's
extremely dark.
It's an ethnic cleansing, right? Like, let's be clear what this is.
I mean, like, there is an explicit statement that the government attacked the people for their faith. It is ethnic cleansing, and
continues to, right?
Yes, that's the other thing.
There's still like daily bombing.
Yes, there is a scheduled bombing. They know that there is going to be a bombing at a certain time because it is that regular an occurrence. So a couple of notes here. I think it's slightly charming how Renton just immediately jumps into the hail of stones and gets conked in the head. It's very noble, even if it's extremely stupid.
He's just so down bad. He is so down bad.
Yeah.
She might have been a mass murderer. It doesn't matter, man.
I mean, I think that is almost like the part that I think like is this show also highlights that in his naivete, in his foolishness, right? That Renton is fundamentally a good person, a compassionate person.
Absolutely.
Right. Like he hears Eureka's story, right? You know, he listens to Eureka regale the dozens or hundreds of people she has killed. And I mean, maybe Renton is a bit too quick to forgive because, you know, a hot girl did it, but like there is an element of like that was you, that is not you, right? Like, like he immediately extends a hand of empathy towards Eureka.
That's ultimately the issue which drives this episode and the next episode, right? The idea of have these people changed, or are they just the same people a little further along the same path? I mean,
yes.
I think that Renton's appeal to Eureka here can be read. I think it is equal parts genuine empathy to try and G her up, you know, but also there's a certain amount of denial on his part, right? Like there's a certain amount of denial that, you know, the girl he thinks he loves, the people he has come to admire, they can't be evil, you know, they can't be monsters. And I think that ambiguity is deliberate, right? I think
it's interesting, right? Because his naivety is both his greatest asset and his biggest weakness.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and I think that you know, throughout the podcast so far, we've talked a lot about Eureka as a Ray copy, you know, as a clone of the character Ray Ayanami, metaphorically, not literally. But I think this shows that she was much more like that character before, and the current incarnation of the character is a deliberate move away from those archetypes. In particular, when Renton asks her why she did it, and she says it was proof I could exist as I was, and that to me is a line that is very Ray in its construction, right? Like,
she is very like, at the moment she's very like end of show Ray before they lobotomize her.
Well, before they killed her and replaced her.
Before they kill her and replace her.
It's very like, because I mean, she literally says if Holland, I mean, it's almost, it is Ray and Gendo-esque in its relationship, like between Eureka and Holland, right? She says, I did it because Holland told me to, right?
Yes.
Almost, right? It's
and I also think here, I mean, there's not, you don't want to read too much into this, but there is, and I think this applies to Holland as well, and the rest of the Gecko State, but there's a reason people use child soldiers. It's because they're more persuadable. It's because they are less likely to question the things they are told to do, right? Eureka is an extreme example of that trope, but it's very clear that Holland may also have been an example of that trope. He was clearly quite a young man when all of this happened. You know, he's hardly old now. But Eureka especially, she did it because it was the only thing she knew how to do, right? And I think what's important is that is the point of the character of Ray Ayanami, right? And obviously she is in a different story and that goes a different way. But the important point in this episode is where Eureka sees those children and doesn't kill them and instead chooses a different path, right? It proves that she has grown beyond the need to be defined solely by the thing she does. She has become a more rounded character. And although we have not necessarily seen that process, you can see the link between the person she was and the person she is now. And I think that's so important to get the measure of the character.
I think it's also interesting that Renton tries to cheer her up by pointing out, oh, no, you haven't changed. You were always this, there was always this hint of kindness in you that caused you to save these children. And that is who you are now, but it was always a part of you, so you really haven't changed. And this is supposed to be something that cheers Eureka up, but we see in the end that she takes it the wrong way, right? That she interprets this as, I cannot fundamentally change who I am. I am fundamentally, an empty shell who just takes orders and carries them out.
I really think this dynamic is interesting because, like, I think like it is these two characters are still kind of talking past each other, but also I feel like this is one of the first real conversations Renton and Eureka have in the show where they start to like emotionally reciprocate each other. Like they start to like actually recognize the other as like a person and an individual, but like they're also still like young, they're still kids, like they still don't quite fully have the tools and the vocabulary to truly speak to each other, but you see the steps here, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a couple of important points in their conversation here and their interaction. Firstly, Eureka chides Renton for the first time actively. She says, "You think it's a game, right? You haven't realized it's not a game." And that's sort of the first time she's genuinely been upset or angry with him, right? Or the first time that she has viewed him as anything other than sort of a source of amusement or something. And also she sort of, I mean, she doesn't say it in so many words, but she basically reveals that she's the only reason she wanted them to bring Renton along is because he helps the Nirvash, which we kind of knew from implication already, but like saying it straight to his face, he's upset. He's clearly upset about the thing, and
even though it's not necessarily the truth, right? It might just be something that she says to twist the knife.
Yes, and we know that Eureka is not somebody who is good at expressing her own emotions, obviously. But the fact that she comes out and says it right to his face is, again, another moment for him sort of to take someone else off their pedestal a little bit. And this is also the first time he actively defies something she says. She wants, she doesn't want to fight. She wants to go. And he says, "Nah, screw that. We will fight instead." And that's a big moment for him. It's a moment where he has taken the initiative and he sees her more as a person and less of an unattainable, perfect angel, my wife,
less of a Madonna. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's interesting because you mentioned Aqua, that at the end of this episode, Eureka says she hasn't changed. And that's true. She does say that. But when Renton is there, she says, "Maybe I have changed."
Right.
And so she is uncertain. She doesn't know how to feel. And that, again, is a very different image we've gotten from the kind of very hyper-focused, very stoic Eureka so far. She cries here. That to me is a big deal. She's actually crying. She's upset. And
the image of the Eureka who has it all together, who is so much more mature than Renton, also like embodied by the three kids that she's taking care of, sort of shatters in this episode, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And they mentioned this again at the end. Renton says it. This is a place that makes everyone choose something, and that's about this episode, right? Renton chooses to continue to support and believe in the Gecko State, even though it has been revealed to him that they are, at best, war criminals.
Yeah, I mean, in line with that, right? It is a 22-minute mecha anime TV series. So how do we achieve our emotional self-actualization in this moment? By committing some more murder. I don't know how many people are stationed on those bombers, and I'm not going to act like the people committing these bombings are innocent in any way whatsoever, but it is very funny to me that they play the heroic Eureka 7 music as they, basically sink a ship.
Yeah, they crack out Supercar for this.
I will say that they do. They explicitly show that they cripple the bomber, but it does not crash. You see it fly away into.
All right. That explosion's pretty big.
Renton Thurston has never killed a man.
Yes, but I think in this case it is not a case of murder solving the problems of murder.
All right.
But yes, I get where you are coming from thematically. A couple of other things I want to note here. For the first time, they explicitly show that the Nirvash can move on its own without any sort of input.
Yeah.
Makes you think, huh? There is also the first appearance of the moon as a motif, which is something which comes back on and off in various forms. But the moon will be something of a recurring visual motif here. It comes back up.
Also
now
in
and
the
again.
OP, of course.
Yes, of course. And finally, Renton gets a room.
He sure does.
He gets
to sleep in Talho's wardrobe.
Yeah, he gets a horrible, crappy little closet that he has to clear out himself. But he gets a room. He gets an official wheel truck.
A Gecko
thing.
State wheel.
Yes.
We have these. We keep these branded wheels in a cupboard in the closet, and we give them out to new members.
Yes. But I think it circles back round to that theme of acceptance, right? Even Holland, who actually doesn't appear a huge amount in this episode past his initial outburst, even he acknowledges that by revealing their past and the fact that Renton has chosen to stay, that makes him one of them now, for better or for worse, right? He is ride or die.
It also nicely mirrors what happened last time. Renton defied orders and they threw him in the brig for a week. And this time Renton is expecting the same thing to happen, except the reaction is completely different. Because this has shown to Holland and the rest of the Gecko States, this is not just a bratty kid defying orders because he wants to be shitty. This kid has chutzpah, he has the attitude needed to join our rebel alliance.
Right, but I think it's not just the chutzpah, it's also the, okay, we are bad people now, or we were bad people, and you have accepted that, therefore you can truly be one of us, because you share our dark secret.
Yeah, you have passed the test of, how good are you really, he has proven before to be noble and brave before, but this is sort of like his ultimate test, right? To see how...
It's more a test of personal loyalty than quality, right? Because do you genuinely believe these people have changed? Do you genuinely believe these people are now not the murderers and thugs that they were in the past? And clearly, Renton has picked his course, whether that's because he believes in the Gecko State or just in Eureka herself is somewhat up in the air, but he's in on it now. It's like joining a gang. Now it's a collective. It's a collective responsibility.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
We have all committed murder together now. Where we go one, we go
basically,
all.
Yes.
I mean,
basically, yes.
Whether intentional or not, I'm not gonna go back and fucking count or anything, but I'm 90% sure that Renton is at least directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of at least a handful of people at this point.
Well, we'll see. Perhaps that will catch up with him at some point.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see, won't we? But
for now, they are all in their war crimes club together, and we get something of a resolution, some sort of capstone on this episode, and we do end on the unsettling note of Eureka saying she hasn't changed. So that, that is another thing that is now bubbling under in terms of the increasingly complicated relationship between these characters. But this is a fantastic episode. It's an extremely powerful, extremely strong episode, and, it lays the foundation for character dynamics that will continue throughout the whole run of the show. It feels genuinely climatic of this first segment of the show. We've sort of cleared the decks for what's to come.
Get you a show that will not actually give you any concrete world building until episode 9.
Well, kinda.
I know there was world building up till this point. Just I've been hearing, especially you, Aqua, talking about they still haven't really explained much about the world itself yet, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't even remember when they actually start talking about.
I mean, we said it a few times, but this is one of the advantages of having so many episodes, right? Is that you can really let that stuff breathe. You can pace out the introduction of the elements that to introduce them at their most dramatically appropriate time there, and This episode both answers some questions and lays out a whole bunch of new ones.
For sure.
And that's something that will continue into episode 10, Higher Than the Sun. Aqua, do you know what this musical reference is?
Primal Scream, baby.
It is indeed a reference to Primal Scream, yes. It's a track from their 1991 album Screamadelica, widely known as their breakout album that made them a big deal. The only thing I will note is that this song was produced by noted underground electronic house artists, The Orb, who were responsible for a lot of the ambient trance scene in the 90s in the UK.
All hail Orb.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Screamadelica, incredibly important. Like, basically every, like, iconic 90s act from Britain is in some way indebted to Primal Scream, from Fatboy Slim, Chemical Brothers, all the way to more of the, like, Britpop-oriented stuff.
Absolutely, yes.
It all starts here.
One of the seminal albums of the 90s in the UK, at least. This will not be the last Primal Scream reference, incidentally, so there's a hint for the future there. But we open up this episode confirming that the Kalashnikov AK-47 exists in all universes, in all places, in all times.
Yeah.
It is gun.
Forever.
In any time, in any age, you know.
Yes.
Also reliable.
Also, as we alluded to last episode, it turns out Eureka not the only one out there committing a bunch of war crimes, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Right, it was definitely alluded to in episode 9, and here in 10 we open up with what appears to be a sort of a PTSD dream from Holland, reliving the events of the ethnic cleansing of the Vodorak, and yeah, it's still bad.
Yeah, there
goes back to Vietnam.
There's a lot of heavy violence shown on screen here. Couple of things. Holland is sleeping on the couch. That's because
I found that super funny.
Whether that's because he's in the doghouse or he just doesn't want to disturb Talho with his weird nightmares. Unclear. Maybe a little bit of both.
I like to think she was like, "Wow, you punched a child. You sleep on the couch tonight, and also I'm going to sleep naked just to spite you."
She's a lady in anime, of course she sleeps naked.
It does seem like they do sleep together, though. It generally is the implication there.
Yes.
I will say, I unintentionally, probably really funny. I should have saved the screenshot of like when God, it's like. Exact context, right? It's like Holland is like about to like caress Talho, and then Talho mentions Renton's name in her sleep, and like Holland instantly recoils to the other side of the room. And I just love the like hunched over anguished pose he takes, like
I'm so fucked up.
There's a little bit of the "I'm so fucked up" energy to it. I just posted it in the Discord. Like that one, it's just unintentionally like.
There's definitely some. There's some. If I can't see her, she can't see me. Energy there.
Yeah.
I mean, the funniest thing is there's like two implications for this, and both of them are hilarious. Which is the first one is that Holland is jealous that Talho was dreaming of Renton, and the second one is that hearing Renton's name is such a massive turn off for him that he decides not to caress her face.
Yeah,
I mean, as. I must also offer the sensible third option, which is that Renton's name is connected to his trauma, which, as we will learn through the episode, is actually the case there.
Yes,
but yes, it is funny, and it does sort of perpetuate this ongoing, maybe joke, maybe serious rivalry between Holland, Renton, Eureka, Talho, like love dodecahedron thing.
Right.
So it's a pretty good. It's a pretty good little joke / foreshadowing here. We also see Hap just sleeping in the lounge, sitting at a chair. Like nobody in this crew can sleep properly. They probably all have terrible posture.
A regular bed
like
is probably a premium on the Gecko state. It seems, you know.
I guess
it would be very in character for Talho to claim the only bed.
It's the one and only bed on the entire Gecko state.
Also, Hap is just like a huge dirtbag. He's very reliable, but he is a big old dirtbag. Couple of details at the beginning here. I think Renton holding on to his dumb ramen delivery prank souvenirs is cute. We also get some actual introspection from him. You know, like I think that this is maybe the first time where he sits down and genuinely sort of reflects and goes, oh, maybe I don't actually know everything. Maybe things are more complicated than I think they are. Maybe there's dynamics here which I don't understand.
Unfortunately, he thinks about that in the middle of ironing the clothes, but yes.
He was ironing Talho's old Nazi uniform, and
God, that really
then
is
tries to
basically-
comically get rid of it.
I mean, look, if you want to immediately signal that a state is perhaps a wee bit fascist, there are some time-honored motifs you can go for there. I think it's
in addition to that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Zigg.
No, you first.
No, my comment is for later. Applies to something later in the episode, but
well, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think it's very charming that the gecko has sort of a weird onboard shop that is
okay. Never mind. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
no.
Gecko State has like a canteen, like a combini. Like there's a sign for curry in this
Yeah.
shop.
There are freezers full of drinks and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
like
The world's first onboard 7-Eleven.
like Gecko State is so fucking cheap. They charge their own crew members. Like,
I think the sympathetic portrayal is that it's a way for the people who want to spend money on things to spend their share of the money on luxuries, right?
sure, yeah.
When you're
Board
traveling,
wax and curry.
right? Yes, but I mean, when you're traveling on a ship, be it a water ship or an airship in this case, luxuries are limited to a certain extent, and I think the sympathetic read is that this is just an easy way for the crew who want things to get them, and rather than divvy everything up equally and have some stuff go to waste. But it is weird. It is kind of weird.
Just the fact that it is set up like an actual like convenience store, right? Like it's not a commissary or something. It's like
why have a cash register? You're basically working on the honor system already. Just have a basket where people chuck the money, stuff like that.
Well, I feel like with Gecko State, I don't know if I would trust Gecko State to honor an honor system.
Right.
And say it's not different from having like a vending machine at your workplace, right?
Right. I guess that's true, but
also, it's maybe just part of like an elaborate hazing ritual where like, okay, after like 10 episodes of bullying the new guy, the next thing he gets to do as a fully fledged member of Gecko State is man the store.
Yeah, I mean, like, the impression I got is that it's like a rotating duty, right? But
he gets to be Mr. Manager.
It's just one of those weird details which I think is something that you would see from a Japanese production, but not necessarily something made anywhere else. I don't know why. It's charming in a way, but it is deeply weird, I think.
I mean, I've played enough RPGs to know that airships always have an onboard shop.
It's true. Admittedly.
I mean, whatever, right? This is the same thing as like when you guys are talking about the freaking like ramen container in that episode, right? Like Eureka 7 is this show with like all these like kind of high-minded, interesting world-building elements, and then also sometimes you just throw in, I don't know, something straight out of modern Japan, because why not?
I mean, because you need to relate to the audience, right?
Yes.
I think that this episode is the first time we actually see the Gecko State enthusiastic about the thing they are supposedly meant to be all about, which is riding the waves. Everybody actually seems invested in what's going on, in trying to catch the wave.
Stress seems, because Holland seems really enthusiastic, but the end of the episode reveals that.
Well,
I think a facade.
I think he was genuinely enthusiastic. The difference is obviously it doesn't quite go as he intended
until he finds out. Yeah.
But I think that the animation and the writing does a good job of conveying sort of that pent up excitement before the big launch. You know, everybody is hopped up and energetic and and sort of prepping and strapping in for everything, and you get a sense of that bustle and that energy that everybody's sort of throwing around.
Yeah,
it also sort of works on. Oh, sorry.
I was just to kind of just quickly summarize what's going on here, right? Like they find out there's a really cool big wave happening on like not the other side of the world, but very far from where they're at, and the only way they can get there on time is if they take the gecko state into the atmosphere, right? To sort of
out of the atmosphere,
or out of the atmosphere. My bad. Yes. And so we get this great bit of like, everybody kind of getting ready, right, for going into near space with the gecko state.
Yes. Eureka throws Renton a sick bag because we just can't let that joke go. It's pretty good.
Yeah, he's a pukey boy that doesn't study.
Yes. Holland gets to shout higher than the sun in straight
because that song is definitely about flying an airship very high.
It's about drugs. We do get the rather arresting image of the gecko just sort of pivoting in midair, which looks wrong, but in a kind of appealing way. The way it just sort of points upwards while it's flying along in the middle of the air, which is not something that makes any sense from any sort of known physical scale, but, the trapars there. And we also get a bit of zero-G animation, which is delightful.
Oh, thank God for zero gravity.
Yes, thank God for zero gravity.
Yes, thank God for zero gravity, says Renton.
It's honestly kind of surprising that it's only episode 10 and they're already going into space. That's usually not up to anime standards. But then again, I guess Gecko State do want to to escape to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism.
It's true.
Surfer vibes.
I will say it's a little ambiguous about whether they are actually in space.
Right, they're not in space. They're above the atmosphere.
Right, it's the thing. Yeah, it's like the thing that those private quote unquote space flights do. They take you into near atmosphere where you can still experience zero G or whatever, right?
I mean, it was the whole thing with Jeff Bezos' company where he took that flight and he was like, I'm an astronaut now. And then NASA were like, you're not an astronaut. To be an astronaut, you need to go at least this high.
Yes.
Right.
I think what they were going for is the same concept as the astronaut training plane, the Vomit Comet does.
Yeah.
But either they forgot or they didn't understand that the zero gravity there is generated by the thing climbing and then descending rapidly. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just get high enough and you get zero gravity. But who knows? It could be that they are actually meant to be in space. It's hard to say.
Look, man, trapper waves. I don't got to explain shit.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. The point is that we do get some fun zero G gravity. We get the kids swimming through zero gravity and Mater doing somersaults and stuff, and just some really nice sort of character tick animation. We get Renton getting way too thirsty because that's still a part of what's going on. We also get a look at what has been referred to as the Great Wall, which appears to be a storm so large it covers an entire quadrant of the planet, basically.
Right, a big-ass typhoon.
Yes, a typhoon, a gigantic storm. It's hard to say, but it is clearly a natural weather phenomenon of some sort. It is not a literal structure. But
I'm assuming it's being referred to as the Great Wall because in the eye of the storm will be some sort of place that people want to reach but can't reach because of the storm.
I think that's a very distinct possibility, yes. Yeah. It's clearly metaphorical. I will say that I'm not sure if you guys caught this, but there's also an important sort of framing device thing here. It's the first time the narrator, Renton, is indicated to be in the future, if that makes sense, because he talks about how tragedy will happen. If things had been different here and now, perhaps the tragedy that is coming towards them.
Because we've had narrator Renton before, but it's always kind of felt. I mean, it's in general, narration is implied to be retroactive, but he's never explicitly referenced future events.
Right. I mean, because his narration has largely been effectively an inner monologue. I
mean, the thing is, it was always framed as because it's framed as a letter or a message to his sister. You sort of automatically infer that it's in a recent future, that he writes this at the end of the episode of today this happened to me, sis. Whereas this shows that narrator Renton is actually far off in the future or further off in the future than might have been implied up until now.
Yes, and it's not necessarily important, but it is obviously quite blunt foreshadowing that things are going to go bad fairly soon. But the fact that they choose this point to use that that technique is interesting. We do cut away from the gecko for a little bit to Dewey, who is getting an important haircut.
Yes, and a fancy uniform. He no longer looks like a weird hobo.
And with this, we can now definitively say he is the person that we see in the opening credits.
Yes,
which was fairly obvious beforehand, but now he has assumed the form that we will see him.
Yeah, implication kind of being that he is being like formally reinstated here, right? Like he is taking a position of power. Has this conversation with Dominic, right? That kind of just sets up that Dewey will. I mean, look, it's no spoiler, right? That Dewey will be kind of the primary embodiment of our antagonists, right? Because they are Dewey and Dominic are the two that kind of clue into the idea that like the Vodorak could not have been responsible for taking out that bomber, right? That somebody else is involved, and that someone else is likely Gecko State.
Yes, but I think the way that they arrive at that conclusion is interesting because Dominic does his standard report and delivers just the facts, but Dewey encourages him to extrapolate. He encourages him to use his initiative and what that shows us is obviously, this guy is kind of a maverick. He's not a military by the books man. He kind of works outside of traditional styles of command.
It's a very classic shorthand for showing that this guy does not play by the standard rules and the hierarchy inside the military. Yeah. Right?
Simple but effective bit of dialogue there. Yeah. There's also a couple of important references here. Dewey talks about that other thing and the black one.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to make a wild guess and say that the black one is a cool robot.
Well, how did you guess that? The fact that they mention it in the next episode preview at the end of this.
I mean, aside from that, but
I mean,
yes, we do not know.
The black one may even have a pilot.
We do not know what those things are yet, but they are mentioned there. We then cut back to the most important scene in this episode, the all Gecko State cheese stretching competition.
Yes.
This is the kind of tiny bit of weird incidental dialogue, which I think is so important to give life to the background characters.
Actually, no, wait, this scene is bullshit because where did they get that pizza from?
They got it from Pizza La. That's what it says on the box.
They're in the middle of nowhere. They're in the war-torn ruin.
They picked it up deliver. On the way. I don't know, man. Yeah, it is a very good
30 minutes. Right? 30 minutes are your money back.
They hired some schmuck to dress up in a tracksuit and deliver it to them
with a fake moustache. Yeah.
Yes. The other thing is, we learn at this location that this used to be an entire city. In fact, there was a city here, but it was swallowed by a tectonic shift. I don't know about you, but the image we see doesn't look much like it was destroyed by an earthquake, right?
Yeah. Also, I have to point out, because I wanted to point this out for last episode as well, but this is the first time we get to see some actually more creative environments, some weird, messed up fantasy landscapes and strange architecture. And, I've complained in the past couple of episodes that many of the cities that they go on adventures in seem to be very generic cookie cutter cities. And this is our first hint of a more mysterious, wonderful world out there, which also makes sense as they seem to be moving away from civilization a bit, or moving into places that have been abandoned by polite society because of what happened there in the past, in both this episode and the last one.
Yes, and I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that not much of this show takes place in major urban centres. We are going to be more on the wild frontier, as befits the sort of outlaw style nature of Gecko State. I will say that clearly the disaster that befell this city doesn't look like any sort of traditional natural disaster. What was your read on what has happened here, Aqua?
Probably something similar to what happens in the second episode, right? The seven, what is seven wave, seven seal?
Swell effect.
Seven swell effect. God, I'm doing the seven seal thing again. Seven swell effect, right? You have very similar, like, almost fungal-looking waves in the earth.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. It looks more like, rather than an earthquake or a sort of a typhoon or anything, it looks more kind of like this city was just swallowed whole, right?
Or like something impacted and that caused like a big crater or swell or whatever.
Yes,
to swallow the city, as you say. Yeah.
Something to bear in mind, at least there. We also learned that actually this city, back when it was a city, has some relevance for Holland and Talho.
It is another. Well, it seems to be implied that this was another city they were ordered to genocide, right?
Well, no, I don't think that's the case, because we see Talho staying in the barracks here.
That's that is an interesting.
I think this
right?
is. I think this is more. This was their base of operations, right?
Yeah. I think my implication was more like.
Go ahead.
No, the thing is, like, it seems to imply that Talho was not an active soldier, but more like an army wife, almost kind of thing. But she did have the uniform, of course. Then again, that might have been Holland, since she was wearing it as like a sex thing. I don't know.
I mean, the important thing is that she was here, right? They were here together.
They have a shared history.
Yes, with this place. Anyway, you were going to say, Jay.
The reading I kind of got, because like the conversation they have at that barracks or wherever it is, the implication seems to be that maybe this is like where Holland and Talho decided to defect, right? Like,
right.
I think that's very
because they do point out that this used to be an army headquarters or like an army base with like the biggest tower that they then abandoned 6 months
the tectonic event.
Yeah.
But yes, the important thing here is that Holland comes back. Clearly, it's not explicit, but I think the implication here is that he comes back from the mission that we just saw, right? That to bomb out the Vodorak.
Yeah.
And yes, because the idea is that this is where they decided that they had to go, because Talho says, take me with you, let's go away. I can't exactly articulate why, but I think this scene is very tragic. I actually think that I got surprisingly emotional at this, because I think they do a really good job of portraying how difficult Holland and Talho find it to be back here. And let's dive into this, because it is the key aspect of the rest of the episode there.
I think the tragedy is in the fact that Talho's dialogue and the way she looks at him sort of reveals that they had been playing with the idea that what they were doing was horrible for a long time, but they were never able to actually run away. And then when Holland comes back and Talho sees him, and she knows that the straw has like broken the proverbial camel's back, right? This is the thing that makes them let go of all of their fears and take that step and defect from the military. I think that's sort of the vibe they're going for.
I think it's important as well, because it shows us most of the stuff we've seen between Holland and Talho to this point has largely been them sniping at each other, honestly.
Yeah.
But it shows that there is real heartfelt love and tragedy under that. They are bound by beautiful and terrible things together. That they are, in a very real sense, they are outlaws. They are together to the end. They are running away from this shared fate. And I think this is where thematically it links back to the previous episode in a very intentional way, because again, there is an argument about whether someone has changed from the past or whether somebody has stayed the same. And Talho wants to say that Holland has changed, and Holland says no, he's still the same person. And that's a clear thematic parallel between these two couples.
I think this is really interesting because So just last episode, right? We were talking about like how Holland is nowhere near as mature or as much of an adult as he presents himself as, with hitting kids and such. And I would almost say this episode is kind of an interesting response to that, because I think in some ways this is almost Holland at his most adult, is recognizing that, like, emotionally, instinctually, there is something selfish he wants to do. He just wants to run away from it all, right? Run away from his responsibilities, run away from his trauma. He wants to leave it all behind, but he will not. He will begrudgingly, not always perfectly, in fact, very imperfectly, take up the mantle of leadership, because that is what an adult does, right? That's what a leader does. And so
just
we kind
when
of get
he thought he was out, they pulled him back in.
So we do get a bit of a glimpse into like that kind of glimmer of potential of the type of leader Holland could grow to become.
I think as well, this is a super important episode for Talho, because it shows actually she is the more mature of the two of them.
Yes.
Holland did want to run away, but it's revealed that actually she took them here deliberately.
Yes.
Like, there is no wave, or the wave is somewhere else. She took them here deliberately so that he would have to confront his past, and for her to confront her past as well. And I think that's a very powerful statement from somebody who has up to this point been portrayed as a very bratty and immature person.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff regarding Tallow in this episode. Like, the obvious thing is like, she gets to do a cool thing by flying the gecko out of the atmosphere.
That's always fun.
But like, I think the most important thing showing Talho's character development in this episode is that when she discovers that Renton has burned her uniform, and she decides not to, comically pursue him and be a brat about it, and she just decides to, acknowledge his intentions, that his intentions were noble, and let it go, right? It also shows that he has also changed as a character, has started to accept him more, and has also started to understand that she kind of needs to be the adult in the room, right? Not only for Renton, but also for Holland.
And also it thematically ties in with the idea of letting go of that past, right? Like, she says herself, I didn't even remember that I had this thing. It means nothing. It's not important anymore. And I think this climactic confrontation / conversation between Holland and Talho is really strong, because Holland makes it clear, that he is a very damaged person. He is struggling with guilt and haunted by his past. And Talho makes it clear that she is as well, but also that she is part of that past. And if he runs away from his past, he's running away from her as well. And also that through that past, they are bound together, right? Like I said earlier, ride or die. They are together till the end, no matter what happens there. And I think it's such a powerful affirmation of the fact that even though we have seen these characters bicker and fight and be jealous and be petty and stuff, that they really do have a strong relationship, that they are a true couple together. And it feels like and they tie it back into the main narrative, because Talho says to him, this is why you brought the boy on board, because subconsciously you know that you have to confront the past, and bringing him back into the loop is the way that you are going to face the past head on. He is going to bring the past back to you, and you're going to have a chance to confront it there. And this feels very much like the culmination of everything that we have been doing for these first 10 episodes, thematically, visually, introspectively, symbolically. A lot of it all comes together at the end of this episode.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this clearly felt like a season finale, right? We learn new things about the world. We come to a sort of both a emotional and a narrative climax, and then we have the meat, like the actual meaningful stuff in this episode, and we end with a teaser of what our next arc is going to be. It feels very much like a closing statement on this early run of episodes, especially with the whole theme of like, what is an adult who deserves to be put on a pedestal? What does it mean to be responsible all of those themes that we have addressed so far.
You know, in line with that, we close out with some introspection from Renton. Again, some more mature, nuanced introspection than his very whiny earlier internal monologue. You know, we have the skyfish again, which we've not seen since the early episodes, as kind of a visual motif to link back to that beginning. And I don't know if you noticed, but the ending of this episode is shot a lot like the ending sequence. It's the same soft golden light, the same sort of everybody crouched down and sitting on the wing and stuff like that. So visually it connects back to something we have been seeing since the beginning of the show.
You could almost even imagine that this spot in this place and time is where like the ED was filmed, quote unquote.
Absolutely. And I checked, it's not. There are a couple.
It's not, but yeah, it's
visually the motif is there. You know, I mean. No, go for it.
It's funny because it's like I really did enjoy talking about this episode and watching it because you know, if we're gonna do the other angle of this podcast, right, which is revisiting Eureka 7, I remember kid me being really bored by this episode. You know, I'm not gonna front, right? Yeah. Like me at like 14, Renton's age, watching this episode, I was like, wow, this sure is an episode of an anime where all these kids just sit around and talk about their feelings.
Yeah.
Where's the robot violence?
Yes!
I don't remember being bored by it, but I also don't remember it being as powerful as I found it this time.
You know, that maybe that's more what I mean, right? Is I found myself, like you, kind of profoundly affected by moments in this episode. Like, it's almost kind of beautiful that, like, I think it maybe speaks to, like, the hallmarks of, like, a really good this type of mecha anime, that like there are things you love about it as a boy, and then when you become an adult there are new things you learn to love about it. And
absolutely, yes.
I feel like I'm really experiencing that with Eureka 7.
I think the interesting thing to me was I actually think this second episode, episode 10, is actually even better than episode 9, even though episode 9 is nominally the episode where we get a lot of important revelations.
Right.
But they work so well as a pair together, you know, because
definitely
episode 9 is about Eureka and Renton and Eureka, and episode 10 shows us that in one way Holland and Talho are very much a mirror to Renton and Eureka, you know. And you know, before we move into the wrapping up, I do want to point out that there's some very fun Renton and Eureka stuff here. You know,
absolutely.
His inability to spit out his confession.
Shoutouts to Woz and Jobs being the worst wingmen of all time.
Just like Woz is exasperated. You know, you should just spit it out, man. Just spit it out. But I also think that there's an important sequence here where, for the first time, I think we see Eureka is worried that Renton is replacing her. You know.
Man, there's like that really good bit where like just the small little ways in which Renton doing maintenance on Nervash have fundamentally changed Eureka's relationship to the Nervash. Right? There's that bit where like,
and to him,
because like he subconsciously like tightens a canister too tight for her, right? And like she can't do it by herself now. Renton has to take care of it, and it's like it's just these little things, right? That like, and I don't know if it's necessarily a positive or a negative thing, but it's like as you give up, as you kind of like allow someone into your life, right? Like you invite a certain vulnerability, you invite a certain like foregoing of agency, right? That's sort of what it means to be in a relationship with another person, and I kind of like. It's my favorite mecha anime where the robot is a metaphor for bigger things.
Yes,
right. The maintenance of the Nervash kind of represent these like aspects of their growth, the ways their relationship is changing.
I think it's also a sorry.
No, you first. Go for it.
I think it's also a demystification of the Nervash, you know, because Eureka has always been talking about it as a kind of as almost a spiritual entity, a living being whose voice she can hear. And Renton, the Nervash is a machine, you know, something that you can tinker with, that you know, if it doesn't work, you just fix it. They have a very different perspective on what the Nervash is, and that seems to set up some kind of conflict about how Eureka regards the Nervash and how she sees her own role in Gecko State.
Yeah. I also think that it ties in very well with the themes across these two episodes, because in episode 9, Eureka admitted that she brought Renton along because he helps the Nirvash, and that was cold and mean and kind of shitty of her. And in this episode, it's the classic kind of your plan succeeded too well, right? Now she is worried that her plan has worked too well, and actually Renton is more important to the Nirvash than her. And without,
what will that represent for her?
Without the robot, what is she? So lots and lots of great text and subtext here. Just a really rich pair of episodes. Of course, there is one more thing.
Here we
which
go.
is at the very end, we have Dominic and Dewey coming to collect a person in a room.
The mad woman in the attic.
Yes. The very first thing she does is physical violence, which I had forgotten, but is very
clogs
apt.
Dominic.
Yes. There's a lot of blood. This may or may not symbolize anything. And we're introduced to Anemone, although she has been in the credits since the beginning.
Yes.
But
yes.
Anemone will be an important character going forward. I think it's fair to say that we don't get much to go on here, but she seems a little unhinged.
Evil woman sighted.
Yes, like this is like a 10-bell evil woman alarm.
Target lock.
There cannot be a Rei Ayanami without an Asuka Langley Shiryu.
Yes. I had forgotten. I think the image of her hugging Dewey and covering him in blood is a really strong visual there.
I mean, we're. I mean, I was trying. I'm going to try very hard not to like speak to any future events here, but even what little we get here, you sort of already begin to see the foundations of like the relationship between Dewey and Anemone. And I think importantly, how that will contrast with other paternal coded relationships in this anime, right? Like here, Dewey calls Anemone my sweet little Anemone, right? Yeah. There's a very doting aspect to it, but again, doting on a girl who seems, a
little bit out to lunch.
It's very like Daddy's Little Villain coded, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I mean, the thing Anemone reminds me of more than anything else is the dark magical girl trope. If Eureka is the magical girl, Anemone is the dark magical girl, and we will see a lot more of that going forward. But I will say it's a really effective entrance. It's a great cliffhanger to end on. Like I said, the visual imagery is fantastic. Poor Dominic is suffering already, and things are going to accelerate in a very real way. Let's say. Any final thoughts on this pair of episodes from you guys?
I think there's two things I want to mention. First of all, once again, showing that anime seems to have regressed a little bit since this show aired, in that I find it astonishing that they can do the kinds of things that they do with a character like Talho, who is usually only there to be like comedy, like angry woman who gets mad at the main character and also kind of hot, ? And that they can like turn her into a fully fledged character while also keeping that immaturity a fundamental part of her character.
She contains multitudes.
Yeah. And the second thing I wanted to say is I think these two episodes really nicely show the appeal of coming-of-age stories, I think. G already mentioned, well, you also, Zigg, that you look at these episodes very differently from as an adult than you did as a teen. And I think it's also noticeable that both of you mentioned that when you watched the show as a teen, you related to very different things than you do now as an adult.
Yeah, I think
that's that is a part of the appeal of coming of age stories, right? I think it is a mistake to assume that these kinds of stories are exclusively for people who are the same age as their protagonists. They are, to a certain extent, partially, because you can relate to that protagonist and go through the same evolution and development as they do. But coming of age stories are equally valuable for adults who can look back on what is being said and made
Yeah.
to be done by the teenage protagonists. And you can also reflect on your own childhood and the role that you now have to play, once again, guiding, people younger than you towards that future.
Yeah, I think part of the motive of doing this podcast was for me to go back at this show and see if it was as rich in characterization as I remembered it. And I think the answer is yes, but in very different ways than I remember. I think that the things I am appreciating about it are at once the same and different, and that's fascinating to me. I think that there's just so much more text and subtext that I hadn't noticed before there, and that's really interesting to watch through. Like, as I said earlier, I don't remember these episodes being anywhere near as powerful as they were to younger me, and in a sense, watching them again really sort of, I think I'm better able to articulate why I find the show good now than I could all those years ago, obviously.
I mean, this is something I often say. I'm not sure I've ever said this on tape, but Ziggs knows this, that kids can usually tell when something is good, but they can't tell when something is bad. Because when they get the vibes that something is good, but they can't really express why it is good. And as a result, they cannot tell that something is bad, if that makes sense.
I think so. No, I think there's some universal truth to that, right? Is like, I think as a kid, consuming garbage is part of being a kid. Like,
right.
You watch and consume and engage with so many bad pieces of work, but I think generally it's the good ones that will stick with you, right? Like,
that's the thing, right? You watch like a gazillion slop shows on Nickelodeon, but you will remember Avatar: The Last Airbender 10 years later.
Yeah, exactly, right? And
like,
so I think it's like, I think that's why it's like, it's like, I mean, look, as I become, an old man and now I complain about what the kids are watching on YouTube, I think, like, to an extent, I definitely have some reservations about what kids should be exposed to in media, but I think broadly, like, as long as the kids get exposed to the good stuff too, I think it'll broadly be okay,
Yeah,
Like, look, I think as long as the kids still watch, I think as long as a kid gets at least a handful of, like, life-changing anime in their life between the ages of, like, 10 and 16, they'll probably turn out fine,
All the kids are growing up and learning important messages about life and growing up by watching Trapped in Another World with my old bunny girl.
I am just saying, all right, if the kids are going to be watching, yes, your ReZeros and Shield Heroes of the world, so be it. As long as they manage to fit a fucking what's a good anime, guys?
Name a good anime.
Name a good anime.
I've heard Eureka 7 is pretty good.
Yeah. God. Dude, that is like so me in like conversations with
this
people.
Is the funniest thing that could have happened. Like, name a good anime.
Dude, I literally freeze up like a deer in headlights if I'm talking to somebody outside my circle, and they're like, "Oh, what's a good anime I should watch?" And I completely lock up. I'm like, there's this anime called Garo the Animation. It came out
over 10 years ago now.
Yeah. And you see, it's an animated spin-off of a Toku series created by Keita. Anyway, okay, my last comment.
Go on.
My actual last comment for the podcast, in all seriousness, I think I would. No promises. I think I'd like to try to make the next podcast as well. But in case I don't, I need to give my shout outs to the briefly seen platypus dog creature in Anemone's room. I don't know if you guys caught
you mean the real star of the show?
Yes, the strange beast lying on Anemone's bed. I don't even remember its name anymore, but shout out to him.
It's Gulliver.
Gulliver, right? Yes, shout outs to Gulliver.
He's great. We'll get a lot more Gulliver. I want to do a bit of housekeeping before we wrap up. Firstly, I want to say thank you to Granonymous, who commented on our last post, pointing out that Holland's reference to the King of Nemi is in fact something that is mentioned in The Golden Bough it's a king who gained his throne by killing the previous king. So thank you for pointing that out, Anonymous, and also thank you for making me now have to read the Golden Bough to make sure I don't miss any more of these references there. But yes, next episode in a fortnight's time, we will be looking at episode 11, Into the Nature, and episode 12, Experience 1. So that's in a fortnight. But in the meantime, you can subscribe to the podcast at all the usual places: Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, Podbean, Stitcher, on YouTube, of course. Let us know what you think. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, all of that good stuff. And we'll talk to you all soon.
And thank God for zero gravity.